Was GTA Liberty City Stories a good game? For their second attempt at making a handheld game after releasing GTA Advance just a year prior, which wasn't really a massive success if we're being honest, there was definitely a lot of pressure to improve on the already existing high standard that was set by the GTA trilogy. But because the game was meant to showcase the events prior to GTA 3, and would therefore have to improve on what it gave us back in 2001, the expectations weren't exactly on the same level as what GTA San Andreas gave us. And since this game was meant to be a handheld first and foremost, being released on the PSP as well as the PS2, some hardware limitations also had to be taken into account when developing this game. So does this game manage to do just that, which would be improving on what GTA 3 gave us by maximizing the potential of the map of Liberty City and introducing new features to accompany that, as well as just being a good handheld GTA game that gamers would enjoy. Today we're gonna take a closer look at this game and determine if it was a good game back when it released, because personally I've played it all the way through more than once and always felt like this game managed to keep me hooked much better than GTA 3 ever did, and I couldn't really tell why that was the case. So why not explore that and figure it out together? First, let's talk about the development LCS went through. It was made by the already famous Rockstar Leeds, formerly known as Mobius Entertainment, and Liberty City Stories was their first big project after being acquired by Take-Two Interactive and rebranded as a Rockstar Studio in 2004. If you're somewhat familiar with the history of the previous GTA games and their development, I'm sure at some point you've heard about Renderware, which was the game engine that GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas were all developed on. But for the first time with LCS, Rockstar switched from Renderware to a new in-house engine, but I couldn't find the actual name for it anywhere. I assume it was a really early version of the Rage engine, which would go on to become Rockstar's main engine for all games, not just the Grand Theft Auto series. However, the game is still based on the trilogy games at its core, more specifically an upgraded version of Vice City's Renderware, and if you pay close attention to some of the animations and elements in the open world, you can spot the similarities between those two. The best example I can use to demonstrate this are the helicopters you can find in this game. They definitely look much better than they did in GTA 3, and unlike that game you can actually fly them, although it's not intended. The developers also used image metrics for the cutscene animations and facial expressions of the characters, and I think they look much better than in the earlier games. But since we're talking about cutscenes in this game, that's where things start to differ a bit from the predecessors. Whereas every mission in all the trilogy games had a dedicated cutscene that was done using motion capture, this game makes use of in-game cutscenes for less important parts of the story, which to a lot of people was a turnoff for some reason, as they felt there was a lower budget allocated to this game, and that it didn't receive the same level of polish and care that the other GTAs did. While the first part might be true, I don't think that just because not every mission has a dedicated mocap cutscene that would somehow mean there was a lack of care from the developers or Rockstar as a company. Firstly, not every mission needs one, just like not every mission in the prior games needed to have a cutscene, as some missions start from a phone call or even a letter, and they barely last 20 seconds. The same case was in LCS too. They just made use of in-game animations instead to save on important resources. But important scenes and introductions to a lot of characters are still made via motion capture cutscenes, and when that happens, I think the animators did a great job. Granted, the technology for it happened to improve, but that doesn't take away from the amazing work the developers did. You also have to keep in mind that both LCS and VCS were made over the course of a single year, so where a few corners might have been cut, they make up by offering a better experience. But where others like to point out the shortcomings of this game, I'd like to also talk about the improvements of this game, which there are plenty of. And why not start with the amazing amount of content you can go down into while roaming around the open world, from selling cars and bikes to participating in one of my favorite minigames of all time, Slasher, eliminating swarms of chickens, off-road bike challenges, a lot of street races available that start from different phone booths around the map, the usual vehicle side missions like Taxi and Vigilante, and many more. With all of them combined, I feel like LCS does a much better job of using the whole map than GTA 3 did, and you're also relatively safe to roam around even after you complete the story. Some gangs also attack Tony just like they attack Claude after certain points in the storyline, but it's definitely much better handled here, and you don't have to fear for your life while entering certain neighborhoods. You're also definitely safe to continue pursuing remaining tasks required for 100% game completion even after you finish all of the missions, something which was nearly impossible in GTA 3. Therefore, you had to complete a lot of the tasks required as early as possible, else you could remain stuck and unable to finish the game to 100%. Let's not forget that GTA 3 also had missions that would disappear if you completed them in the incorrect order. Again, you could finish the story just fine, but if you were trying to go for the 100% completion route, you're out of luck, unless you're willing to rewind and redo a lot of the lost progress. But enough GTA 3 slander. I really love it, it just has its own issues, so perhaps I'll talk about it at length in a future video. Liberty City Stories stories also improves on the core mechanics of the game, like a better aiming system with the ability to quickly switch between multiple targets, a wider array of weapons to choose from, the addition of bikes, as well as a lore explanations as to why they're missing just 3 years later. Gotta love Rockstar's clever ways to hide their prior limitations when it came to the games. You also unlock a lot of outfits throughout the game, with some of them looking particularly interesting. And they definitely make the game experience that much better. Because I want you to tell me, in what other vanilla version of any GTA game can you play as a giant chicken wreaking havoc in the city by going on a rampage? This is just pure madness. The soundtrack is also just as good as in any other game, with a few memorable songs, with my personal favorite being Train by Connor and Jay. And finally, I also want to quickly touch upon the game's storyline, which I've mentioned like 15 times but never talked about. This time around, instead of being a random street thug that got betrayed and is willing to work for anyone as long as he gets paid and would literally betray almost anyone for the right price, here we're in the shoes of Tony Cipriani, a member of the Leones and soon to be Salvatore's right-hand man as we see him in GTA 3. But before he gained that title, he had to work his way up the ranks, and that's exactly what we do in this game. We start off by arriving back in Liberty City after going into hiding for a long time because of a favor we did for Salvatore by taking out a made man. We are then introduced to Vincenzo, who, in my opinion, should have been the main villain of the game instead of Torini, who we barely see in the game. I've talked about this in a previous video, but having Vincenzo as the main antagonist would have made the story a lot better, as we have no real goal besides working for Salvatore and various associates of the Leones. We do end up becoming a more important mob guy, but the story feels like Salvatore is the real protagonist, at least in some parts of it. Tony is a pretty well written character, and he does seem to at least care for something more than himself, and he really does a great job of demonstrating that by taking out anyone that his mother thinks is a better guy than him. But Tony does even more diabolical things, like blowing up an entire neighborhood under the orders of Donald Love, who we also see in this game along with other returning characters like Maria and 8-Ball. Tony is nowhere near a good guy, but he does at least have certain characteristics that make him a better protagonist than Claude. I know it's really unfair to him, but the guy literally doesn't speak. So yeah. Changing a few aspects of the story would have definitely improved it by a significant amount, but it's not like the one we got was awful. That's not the case at all. Although I gotta say, the missions themselves can be a bit repetitive in their nature at certain times, but that's alright with me, and I'll be honest, the difficulty bar for this game is set significantly lower than in GTA 3. But that could simply be from the improved movement and shooting. With that in mind, the game was pretty well received, with some praising it for making the most of the pretty limited PSP hardware, while others either felt like the game was more of a DLC than a standalone game, or just felt like the formula for GTA wasn't really improved when compared to the earlier games. But I think that's not really fair, because this game is meant to be its own thing, even though at its core it's meant to be a prequel to GTA 3. I think Rockstar Leeds did a really solid job with LCS. Don't just take my word for it. The game ended up being the #1 best-selling game on the PSP with over 8 million copies sold worldwide. It dwarfs even VCS, which takes the second spot with over 5 million copies sold for the PSP. Though the numbers I found might not be totally accurate for this matter, counting the PS2 copies as well, LCS sold nearly double the amount of copies VCS did. So that would technically make it the better successful out of the two. But is it also a better game than VCS? That one I'm going to leave out to you guys to decide. So, is LCS a good GTA game? 1000% yes, without a shadow of a doubt. This game was meant to be a simple prequel, but Leeds managed to make it into a much better experience than what the predecessor offered. And I do feel like this game is generally overlooked and isn't given enough love. If you've never given it a chance, I highly recommend it to you, even if your taste for this franchise might have been spoiled by some of the newer games. This game will continue to give me a unique feeling and put me in a specific yet undescribable vibe whenever I sit down to play it. It might not be the best GTA in the series, but it personally keeps me entertained no matter what I decide to do in the open world. My favorite activity is still probably riding around dressed as a giant chicken. I just cannot get over this outfit for some reason. If you liked what you saw, leave a like and comment down below your thoughts on this game, whether you like it or not, and what your favorite memories with the game are. And of course, consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.